It's interesting how in some levels, by adding a single simple mechanic, the difficulty goes from fairly chill to everyone's in a blind panic. And today's level is one of those types of missions. Looking over everything, R5B2 is a fairly straightforward B tier mission. But then you throw in an error alarm and some infectious fog filled zones you have to traverse through, and now we've got a bit of a problem on our hands. Hello everyone, Professor Scaly here, and welcome to the alternate R5B2 level guide. As always, we're going to be going over your loadout, and today I recommend you bring with you a bio-tracker, a mine deployer, a C-foam launcher, and then any sentry of your choice. And the reason why I recommend the bio-tracker, aside from the typical reasons, is in this area you're going to have to deal with an error alarm upon completing the secondary objective. And this error alarm will be in play for the rest of the level. And shortly afterwards, you have to go and do the overload objective, which is going to require you to go through multiple zones completely covered in infectious fog, filled with enemies, both smalls and bigs, and even a few scouts in some of them. And it can be pretty difficult to actually safely traverse through all these areas without getting hit left and right. As for the mine deployer and the C-foam launcher, we're going to be utilizing these two a lot throughout the level. There will be alarm doors where we can make good use of these two tools. There will be blood doors where we can utilize the mine deployer. And in the secondary objective, we're going to have to deal with two uplink terminals. And one of the easier ways to deal with uplinks in most situations is just simply find the one and only door enemies can come in through, just mine it and C-foam it, and keep C-foaming it a little bit until the person on the terminal is done with most or all of the codes. And we don't really have to worry about enemies all that much. And last but not least, when it comes to that sentry, this is just to give us a little bit of extra firepower. Maybe a door breaks down earlier than we wanted to, or we just don't really want to perma C-foam a door all the way until the end of the uplink since we want to balance our ammo a bit, and that's perfectly fine. Having a sentry, whether it's a close range sentry like an auto or shotgun or burst sentry, is usually good. I typically don't like bringing a sniper sentry into this level as there's only a few areas where it can actually help out a bit, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter too much on what type of sentry you bring as long as you know how to position it properly and you don't rely on it too much to deal with pretty much every single one of the enemies. Dropping down into level, you'll see that your main objective is to collect 9 GLP-1 canisters, and there's actually a total of 13 of them in the level. And these canisters will be located in every single one of the zones along the main objective route. So there's a few different ways you could go about completing this level, as you do not have to go to every single one of the zones to get the 9 that you need. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. For the time being, you and your teammates are going to be starting off inside Zone 79. And like I said, there will be some GLP canisters in here you can collect. There will be enemies to deal with, resources to collect, and there's also going to be your very first bulkhead door control and your door to your main sector, as well as your first bulkhead key. So go throughout this entire area, collect every single one of the enemies one by one, grabbing those resources and resupplying with them. And once you find that bulkhead key, you're not going to want to plug it into that door control yet. Rather, we're going to want to hold on to it and head over to the blood door over to Zone 82. There's another blood door a little bit further into the zone, but we're not going to be heading there quite yet. We're just going to be focusing on Zone 82 as we want to make our way to the secondary objective. And inside Zone 82, after you deal with that blood door, there will be a fair amount more enemies to deal with, as well as a single scout patrolling about, which be very cautious. There's a good chance that scout will be on the other side of the blood door, which if you do notice that with the bio-tracker, just simply mine the blood door, and then as you open it up, run away and get into a different room really quickly to minimize the chance of enemies actually screaming and alerting everything in that first room. But after you deal with the blood door, just go throughout the area, deal with all the enemies, grab more resources and resupply. And in here, you'll be able to find a generator as well as a security door to Zone 83, although we're going to be ignoring these for the time being as we can't even get a power cell yet. And there's also going to be your bulkhead door control and your door to the secondary objective, which this is what we're going to be going for if we're going for a prisoner efficiency run. For those of you who are doing a main objective only run, we're still heading into here, of course, to get GLPs and a few other things, but we're going to want to jump to the timestamp that you see on screen, as there we are going to continue to talk about the rest of the main objective and how to get the 9 GLPs and get out alive. Everybody else, though, we're going to be heading over to the bulkhead door to Zone 156. This is just an open door, no scanner or anything tied to it, and we're going to go in there and get started on our secondary objective. And upon entering into Zone 156, you'll see that your secondary objective is to find 2 specific terminals and create uplinks with both of them. The first terminal being located inside Zone 156, while the second one will always be located somewhere inside Zone 157 or Zone 158. As for Zone 156 itself, in here there are going to be some enemies for you to deal with, 2 scouts patrolling about, so be cautious of them. There will be 2 color key cards, one that will get you into zone 157, the other getting you into 158. There will be infectious fog in some of these areas, which can make it a little awkward to traverse through them. And of course, there's going to be your very first uplink terminal. Now, there's actually a total of 4 different terminals inside of the zone, 3 of them being in different rooms from each other, which means depending on which terminal you have, it can completely change up how you're going to want to actually set up your defenses. But before we talk about this first uplink, we're actually going to want to head into zone 157 or 158 and deal with the second uplink terminal first. The reason for it being that once we finish both uplinks, an error alarm will be initiated that we will never be able to turn off. So it's nice to be closer towards the main objective sector, that way once we're done with the secondary objective, we could just run back out into the main area and then get on with the rest of the level and not have to run quite as far. It doesn't really make that big of a difference in this level, but in some levels it actually can, and it's a nice habit to develop. So once you've taken care of everything in 156 aside from the first uplink terminal, you're then going to head to zone 157 or 158, plug your color keycard into the door to unlock it and do the full team scan, and then head right on inside. As for these 2 zones, fairly similar to each other, more enemies for you to deal with, 1 scout patrolling about in each of them. There will be a fair amount of spitters, so keep your flashlights out, and of course there'll be resources to collect and resupply with, as well as 2 different terminals, one of which is going to be your second uplink. And once you've gone through all these areas and clear every single one of the rooms, all that's left to do is just simply find that second uplink terminal and set up your defenses for it. Then once you finish that uplink terminal, go back into zone 156, set up your defenses for that, and finish that terminal. And once you do, your secondary objective is completed. So at this point, I just have a lot of map overlays I need to show off. So let's get started with them. If you're going into zone 157 and your uplink is in the very first room, your map overlay is going to look like this. Fairly simple, only 1 spawn location for enemies, an open room divider they have to go through, and then the door right here that they have to go into to get into your room. So shut that door, mine it, and C-foam it, and if you want to, re-C-foam it a little bit during the uplink while your teammates put in the total of 6 different codes they have to do in order to finish the uplink. If you and your team have the other uplink terminal that's a little bit further to the north though, your map overlay is just mirrored. Enemies are going to be spawning down in that small room, they have to go through that door to get to you and your teammates, and the only real thing I need to take note of is that door is beyond the open room divider, so while it is possible to just keep C-foaming it from a distance as long as you don't step beyond the open room divider, you need to be cautious, because if you walk down those stairs a little bit and you're now in room B, there's no valid 2-room away spawn for these enemies, which will then make it so that enemies will either spawn inside room A, where they were spawning in the first place, or they're going to spawn in room D, which is right next to the person who's on that terminal. But that's really all there is to the terminals inside zone 157. If you're going into zone 158 though, in order to get your second uplink terminal, your map overlays are going to look like this. If you're in that northern room, you're just chilling in there, and enemies are going to be spawning down south. There are 2 different doors they have to go through to get to you and your teammates, so the southern door, go on ahead and shut it and C-foam it, but do not bother mining it. And the door that leads directly into your room, shut it, mine it, and C-foam it, and you should be good. If you have the southern terminal though, your map overlay is going to look like this. Again, only 1 possible spawn location for those enemies, although there are 2 different doors they could possibly go through. So I recommend you just have both of those doors shut. Do not mine them or C-foam them though, but the door that leads directly into your room, that's the one you're going to want to shut, mine, and C-foam, and re-C-foam during the uplink. And that's really all there is to it. As for the terminals inside zone 156, if you have the one to the far west, your map overlay is going to look like this. A few different spawn locations for the enemies, but only 1 door that leads directly into your room. So every single door I have highlighted, you're going to want to make sure you shut, but you do not need to mine or C-foam any of them. But this door here that leads right into your room, make sure that it's shut, mined, and C-foamed, and that's where you're going to be holding out at. A thing to take note of too, by the way, is this terminal is down below in the infectious fog, so if you do have this one, keep an eye out for some fog repellers, as those will help out tremendously in making sure the person on the terminal does not have to gain a ton of infection. If you have the terminal that is in the first room of the zone down to the southeast, your map overlay looks like this. Again, a few different spawn locations for these enemies, but there's only 2 doors that lead directly into your room. So again, every single door I've highlighted, shut, but do not mine or C-foam, and these 2 doors that lead into your room, I would say shut both of them, mine both of them, but don't C-foam them quite yet. Instead, wait to see which one of the doors they're going to go for, because sometimes they will go for both of the doors. Sometimes though, they'll only go for one of them. And then last but not least, if you have one of the 2 terminals up to the north, your map overlay looks like this. Again, 2 different spawn locations for the enemies, but only 1 door that leads directly into your room. So shut every single one of the doors I've highlighted, but do not mine or C-foam. Mine, C-foam, and shut the door that leads directly into your room, and that's about it. One of the terminals, the one that's closer to the door, is up above out of the infectious fog, but that one that is a little bit closer to the northwestern side of the room, that is down below in the infection. So again, keep your eye out for some fog repellers and you should be good. And once you have finished this uplink, so both of them are completed, your secondary objective is done and that error alarm will be initiated. The error alarm will be spawning in 3 regular strikers and shooters roughly every 50 seconds for the rest of the level, which isn't really all that difficult in itself. 3 enemies every 50 seconds is not that big of a deal. Just gotta make sure that they don't break down any valuable doors for upcoming alarms or spawn ahead of you in rooms with a ton of enemies or maybe even scouts in them and trigger them. So BioTracker, try to keep an eye out for these enemies and give some callouts to your teammates depending on what situation you find yourself in. The other thing though to take note of is once you finish the second uplink, the security door to zone 85 is going to unlock, and that is where we're going to want to head to next, as that's where we have to go to get to our overload objective. So make your way back into the main objective sector, go over to the security door to 85, you can just open it up, no scan or anything tied to it, and inside there will be a few regular enemies, there will be a lot of resources for you to collect, there will be a disinfectant station, so if anybody has infection they can get rid of it right there. There's going to be a fog turbine which you're going to need for basically the entirety of the overload sector, and there's also going to be your second bulkhead key as well as the bulkhead door control and door to your overload objective. So make your way in here, deal with the enemies, keep an eye out for those error alarm enemies, grab resources, resupply, disinfect, get the key, and then plug that into the door control and do the scan for the overload objective. This will unlock the security door to zone 315, which is right next to you, and we can now go over there and get started on our overload objective. Alrighty, overload objective time. This is where things are going to be getting a little bit spicy. Upon entering into zone 315, you're going to see your overload objective is to find 5 OSIP containers, and there's actually a total of 7 of them you could collect. But as far as I am aware, zone 315 itself will only ever have 2 OSIPs in it, and then 316 and 317, one of them is going to have 2 while the other is going to have 3, which means you'll never have to go into all 3 of the zones of the sector, only 2 of them. Which is a good thing, because the security doors to 316 and 317 are both class 4 alarm doors. So a good thing to do before you even really head into 315 is use the terminal in 85 to figure out how many OSIPs are in 316 and 317, and then just simply put it in chat so your teammates know which one of the 2 zones you're going into and which one you're completely avoiding. As for 315 itself, there aren't going to be any scouts in here, but there's going to be a lot of enemies, both smalls and bigs, as well as even some spitters here and there. And of course, you have an error alarm that's currently in place, and this entire zone is covered by infectious fog, which means you're going to need to use the fog turbine. And this really just results in people using one of 2 methods to clear everything out. Either they all go together as a team and just simply blast their way through each of the rooms one by one, as you should have plenty of ammunition at this point in the level, and you just really rely on the BioTrack person to give callouts and tag the enemies to make it easier to deal with them, or you send one person in who just fog dives and just goes into a room, pulls the enemies, and falls back into 85 where the other 3 teammates are chilling at, and you deal with all the enemies out of the infectious fog, and then once the person who goes down has cleared out every single one of the rooms, or I guess I should say pulled every single one of them, then they can use the disinfectant station 85 to get rid of all their infection, and then their teammates can heal them up, and then you can all 4 go together as a team. Either method works, it's really up to you and your teammates how you want to go about this. A big thing to keep in mind is that the error alarm itself isn't really going to get you killed. Again, 3 enemies per 50 seconds is not that bad. The amount of enemies that could be sleeping in one of the really big rooms down here though, that can get you killed if you get every single one of them coming at you all at once and you're not really able to see them because of how much infectious fog is down here. But as you make your way through zone 315, there again are going to be 2 OSIPs in here for you to collect, and there is going to be your 3rd and final bulkhead key. And then towards the far southern end of it, you're going to be able to find the security doors to 316 and 317. Both of these security doors though are going to have class 4 alarms tied to them. If you're going into the northeastern door, which I believe is the one to zone 317, your map overlay looks like this. Really only one possible spawn location for enemies, and there are 2 doors they might have to go through to get to you and your teammates. I say might because these doors might have been broken down in advance because of the error alarm, which means you might be able to utilize them, or you might not be able to. More often than not though, at least one of the 2 doors will survive, which is really good because it means you can shut them, mine them and C-foam them, and then perma-C-foam or just have your sentry near the entrance to the room, and you should be good. If you have the one that's a little bit further down south, which I believe is the one to 316, your map overlay is going to look like this. A little bit different, but overall basically the same thing. Only one possible spawn location for enemies and 1 door they have to go through to get out of that room, so if you can, shut it and C-foam it. And then this door right here is the one they're going to be taking to get into your room, so shut that door, mine it, and C-foam it, and you should be good. It's a fairly small room, so you can complete the scans pretty quickly, but you really want to make sure enemies don't get in here until you have finished it. Either way though, once you're good to go, activate the alarm, get to work on the scans, and then once all of them are dealt with, make sure you deal with every single one of the enemies from the alarm before you open up the door and head into the next area. And when you do head into the next area, you're going to want to be very, very cautious, because Zone 316 and 317 are basically the same. Even more infectious fog, more spitters, more enemies to deal with. I believe both of these zones are covered in pitch black darkness, which makes it even harder to see. And there's going to be a total of 2 scouts in each of these zones, and those scouts are the biggest issue of them all by far. If the scouts do alert, I highly recommend try to get near a door you can shut to mine and C-foam. That way you can at least deal with most of these scout wave enemies all at once with a good explosion, or at least just get somewhere where you're all grouped together and throw down some fog repellers and get ready to hold out for a bit. The biggest thing is to make sure that you do not get surrounded by enemies. But you're going to make your way through. Dealing with those scouts and getting rid of the enemies is by far highest priority. And once they're dead, you can then do a little bit more of a thorough search to look for resources and the last 3 of the OSIPs that you need. And once you have all 5 of the OSIPs, your overall objective is completed. All that's left to do is just make your way back into 315, and if you haven't gotten the bulkhead key yet, then make sure you grab it on your way out. Then go back into Zone 85, you could drop off the fog turbine as you technically don't really need it for the rest of the level, and you can disinfect and grab any resources you might have left behind in here. Then all you have to do is just go back into Zone 79, go to the western side where the bulkhead door control to your main objective is, plug your 3rd and final bulkhead key into it, and that will unlock the security door to Zone 84. And at this point, all that's left to do is just finish the rest of the main objective. Okay, continue on with the rest of the main objective. We just unlocked the security door to Zone 84, which is going to have a Class 3 alarm tied to it. And as you can see with this map overlay, there's only 2 possible spawn locations for enemies during this alarm. Or at least there's 2 of them if you're going for a prisoner efficiency run, because main objective only run people, you don't have to worry about that southern spawn point, and assuming you kept that blood door over on the far eastern side shut, you don't have to worry about the additional 2 spawn locations that open up if you actually went into there. So if you've been playing how I recommend up to this point, you only have 2 or maybe even only 1 possible spawn location for the enemies. Now, when it comes to setting up the 2 western doors, I would recommend just shut both of them and C-foam both, but only mine the one that leads directly into your room, and your sentry could be facing towards that southwestern open security door, as there are no doors down there we can shut, mine, or C-foam. And that's really all there is to it. It's just simply a Class 3 alarm, not all that difficult to deal with, so set everything up, activate the alarm, work on the scans, and once everything is taken care of, you can then head into Zone 84 itself. In there are going to be even more GLPs for you to collect. There will be a power cell which you may or may not need in order to finish the rest of the main objective. There's going to be a single scout patrolling about, and a lot, and I mean a lot, of giant strikers, so be very cautious of them, especially PE people, as you have an air alarm that could wake them up, and that's really all there is to that zone. So go out here, deal with the enemies best you can, grab those GLPs and resources and the power cell, and once you have everything, you're then going to want to get onto a terminal and check how many GLPs are in not only the zones you've already gone through, but also Zone 80, 81, and 83. The reason why I say it is because at this point, you actually could almost be done with your main objective. That power cell could be utilized to either get into Zone 81 or Zone 83. And in some runs, you will have to go into at least one of them in order to complete your main objective. But I've actually had a few runs where all I have to do now, assuming I've collected every GLP up to this point and my RNG is pretty good, all that's left is to just go to that blood door to Zone 80 and go in there, and I'll be able to get the last 2 GLPs, and I actually don't even have to use that power cell whatsoever. So I'm going to talk about every single one of the zones from this point on and everything in them and how to get into them, but just keep in mind that at this point in your run, there's a few different ways you could go about completing it. Now, Zone 80 is that blood door which I mentioned earlier, which means all you have to do is just place 1 or 2 mines on the door, open it up, and just deal with the enemies that do survive the explosion. As for Zone 80 itself, there will be some GLPs in here, a single scout patrolling about, more resources, and more regular enemies, and there's also going to be a generator at the far eastern side which will unlock the security door to Zone 81. And if at this point you still need more GLPs, it's really up to you and your teammates on whether you want to go to Zone 81 right here, or backtrack and go to Zone 83. Personally, I like to go into Zone 81. Both of these generator doors will have Class 4 alarms tied to them, but I find this one easier to deal with because even though the room is much bigger, I don't have to worry about a ton of infectious fog when dealing with the scans. If you go back to the west to the security door to Zone 83, most of that room is covered in infectious fog, which means you either need to use fog repellers or you need to use the fog turbine. If you're going into Zone 81 though, your map overlay is going to look like this. Only 1 possible spawn location for enemies, and this northern door is the one that they should be taking to get to you and your teammates, so shut that door, mine it, and C-foam it, and they're going to conveniently go up that little ladder pretty close to the door, so having your sentry somewhere where it's facing towards that, and you should be good. If you want to go into Zone 83 though, you're going to go all the way to the far western side, and again you'll have a class 4 alarm to deal with. And as you can see with this map overlay, again there's only one possible spawn location for enemies, and I would recommend that this door right here, shut it, mine it, and C-foam it. Then the southern door to your room, go on ahead and shut that one, but the one up to the north, leave that door open so enemies funnel in through there. And of course, your sentry you could just position towards that northern door you left open. Either way though, once you have finished dealing with every single one of the scans for either of these two alarms and all the enemies have been taken care of, you can open up the door and head into Zone 81 or Zone 83. Both of these zones are fairly similar to each other. There'll be more GLPs in them. It's going to be covered in pitch black darkness with some spitters here and there, and there's also going to be 2 different scouts patrolling about. Either way though, once you've collected the 9th and final GLP you need, your objective is completed. Back at the beginning of the level inside Zone 79, your extraction scan is going to appear, so all you have to do is run back over to it and gain the scan and hold out for a little bit. This scan is a silent one, so the only enemies still coming after you will just be the enemies from the extraction alarm, which will be pretty easy to deal with even if you are completely out of ammunition. And once that scan gets to 100%, you are done and you have completed alternate R5B2. And that's all there is to it. Alternate R5B2 can be a bit of a confusing level the first time players go through it. As with most item collection based levels, there's a lot to check out in advance and multiple different ways you can go about completing the mission. When I first played the original R5B2, I actually got baited into doing a main objective only run because I assumed Zone 85, the one with your overload bulkhead door and the disinfect station, would automatically open up after completing the main objective, since Zone 85 sounded like it would come after Zone 84, you know? Thankfully though, in the alternate version, they put some text on the door to let you know that it unlocks after completing the secondary objective, not the primary. As always though, thank you for watching this video all the way to the very end. I do hope that it was able to provide you with some assistance in beating this level. If you have any tips or tricks for this level that you want to share, any questions for me, or you just have something in general that you would like to say, please do let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and if you want to join my lovely community, there's a link to my Discord down in the description, as well as some other links you might be interested in. Among those links being one to the official GTFO merch store, which, as always, I highly recommend you check out if you're a fellow GTFO enthusiast and you're looking to pick up some sweet merch. Until next time, if you haven't already, go check out the alternate Rundown 6 trailer. The rundown itself will be releasing sometime in September, and hopefully, I'll see all you wonderful people in the next video.